Fundamental rule number 8. These are the conditions for your tawaf to be sahih, to be correct. And there are 10 of these, so writing down and memorizing. Number 1, al-Islam. Number 2, al-Aql. Number 3, al-Niyah. Number 4, the correct time must have entered. Number 5, covering the awrah. Number 6, being in a state of tahara, purity. Number 7, avoiding all impurities on you. Number 8, to complete 7 circuits. Number 9, to put the Kaaba on your left hand side. And number 10, al-Muwalat, which is continuous circuits without a break. Okay, let's go through these. Number 1, al-Islam, because as ever, any act of worship cannot be accepted from a kafir. The evidences for these have preceded. Number 2, al-Aql, because the pen has been lifted from the insane person until he gains some intellect. Note here that from these conditions we have not said tamyiz, the age of tamyiz, which is the age at which a child can distinguish between an act of worship from any other act. This is not a condition for the tawaf to be sahih, meaning to say that even if a 5-year-old or a 4-year-old or a 3-year-old or a little baby was to perform the tawaf, it would be accepted and the reward would be for the parent. The evidence for this is that a woman came to Rasulullah ﷺ and held up a baby, and she asked him, "Lihadha Hajj, is there a Hajj for this?" meaning this baby. Rasulullah ﷺ replied, "Na'am wa laki al-ajr." He replied, "Yes, and the reward will be for you." So even if a little baby was to perform the tawaf or the Hajj, the reward would be for the mother, and it would be a correct Hajj. So tamyiz is not a condition here, so just make note. Point number 3 is an-niyah, the intention. This comprises of 2 things, which is stated in the hadith, "Inna Allah ta'ala la yaqbalu min al-amal illa ma kana khalisan wabtughiya bihi wajhu," that Allah does not accept any act of worship except that which is purely done for His sake and His face is sought, meaning you seek to see Allah's glorified face in Jannah. So first of all, you make your intention that you are performing this tawaf as an act of worship, not just as a stroll, as you might go for a stroll in the park. It is not a stroll, it is an act of worship. Secondly, you must seek His face, or you must seek to gain closeness to Him by doing this act of worship. So just make note of these 2 factors of your niyyah. Point number 4 is that the correct time for tawaf al-ifada is after the Fajr on Yawm al-Nahr, which is the 10th of Dhul Hijjah. It extends all the way up till the end of Dhul Hijjah. Point number 5 is that your awrah needs to be covered, just like in the Salah. In the hadith it says, "La yahujju ba'da al-'am mushrikun wa la yatufu bil bayti uryanun," that no mushrik is allowed to perform Hajj after this year, and no naked person is allowed to make tawaf. So it proves that if you want to make tawaf, you have to cover your awrah. The people of Jahiliyyah before Islam used to make tawaf, but they used to make tawaf naked. The reason for this is that they said that we have committed many sins in our clothes, and so it is not fitting that we should wear these clothes which we have committed sins in at the house of Allah. Point number 6 is that you have to be in a state of tahara, just as in the Salah. The evidence for this is the statement of Rasulullah ﷺ to Aisha when she was in her menses and she was crying that she can't perform the Hajj. He said to her, "If'ali ma yaf'alu al-Hajj ghayra an la tatufi bil bayt." He said, do everything that the person performing the Hajj does, except that you don't make tawaf around the Kaaba, because you are in an impure state, a spiritually impure state. The majority opinion is that you have to be in a state of wudu, just like in the Salah, to perform the tawaf. There is a slight difference of opinion here. the minimum that can be said is that it is highly recommended for you to be in a state of wudu for performing the tawaf. Point number 7 is that you need to avoid all impurities from your clothing, just as in the salah. This is due to the hadith at-tawaf bil-bayti salatun illa anna Allah abaha fihi al-kalam, that the tawaf around the house, meaning the Kaaba, is salah, except that Allah has made permissible speaking in the tawaf. So this is the evidence they take when they say that you have to be in a state of wudu and that you have to have clothes which are pure and clean and they do not have any najasa, any impurity on them. Number 8 is that you need to complete 7 circuits. So 6, 5, 4, 3 is not good enough, but 7 must be done. Be sure to make the tawaf on the outside of that circular wall which is on one side of the Kaaba. This circular wall on one side of the Kaaba demarcates the position of the original Kaaba, the Bayt al-Atiq, the ancient house. This new Kaaba that you see is a somewhat diminished version of the old Kaaba. It is not as big as the old Kaaba. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلْيَطَّوَّفُوا بِالْبَيْتِ الْعَتِيقِ, let them make the tawaf around the old or the ancient house. So this wall, the circular wall, demarcates where the ancient house was. Number 9, you need to make the tawaf and the house needs to be on your left hand side. First of all, this is the sunnah, and second of all, from a health and safety perspective, if you were to go around the house in a clockwise direction, so the house is to your right, then first of all you would be stopped by policemen who are on the lookout for maniacs doing such things, and second of all, if that doesn't happen, you will be trampled on by the crowd and will die. And point number 10, all of these 7 circuits need to be done continuously. So you can't do 4 circuits and then go off for a little lunch, nor can you do 4 circuits and then take a little nap. It must be done continuously. If during your tawaf the prayer is established, so the adhan goes off, then you must pray with the jama'ah and you can continue where you left off. So there is no problem in that. Likewise, if you need to take a little rest, and we're just talking 1 or 2 minutes maybe, then again it shouldn't harm your tawaf. And if you need to take a little drink during your tawaf from the Zamzam water, again this should not be a problem. We move to fundamental rule number 9. These are the conditions for your sa'i between Safa and Marwa to be sahih, and there are 7 of these, so making a note. Number 1, al-Islam. Number 2, al-Aql. Number 3, Niyyah. Number 4, al-Muwalat, which is to be done consecutively without a break. Number 5, it should be after the tawaf. Number 6, you need to complete 7 circuits. And number 7, you need to cover the whole distance between the Safa and the Marwa. Let's go through these. Number 1, al-Islam, because all acts of worship need to be done by a Muslim. Allah Azza wa Jal says, وَلَقَدْ أُوحِيَ إِلَيْكَ وَإِلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكَ لَئِنْ أَشْرَكْتَ لَيَحْبَطَنَّ عَمَلُكَ وَلَتَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. It has been revealed to you and to those before you that if you commit shirk, all your actions would be null and void. Number 2, al-Aql, because if a mad person was to make the sa'i, it would not be sahih, it would not be accepted from him. Number 3, you need to have the intention, and the intention is, as the hadith says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَقْبَلُ مِنَ الْعَمَلِ إِلَّا مَا كَانَ خَالِصًا وَابْتُغِيَ بِهِ وَجْهُ, that Allah does not accept any deed except the one which has been done purely for His sake and His face has been sought, meaning you seek to see His face in Jannah. So you make your intention that you're going to perform these circuits not as a stroll, not as a good exercise, not as a cardiovascular, but rather as an act of worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And not just that, you seek to see his face in Jannah. Number 4, al-muwalat. This is as in the tawaf. It needs to be done consecutively, all 7 together, one after the other. So you can't do 3 circuits and then you go off and take a nap or go off and take your lunch. So you need to do it consecutively. If you were to rest just for a little while, maybe 1 or 2 minutes maximum, just to catch your breath, if you're tired, then there's no problem in that. Number 5 is that the sa'i is done after the tawaf, because Rasulullah ﷺ did this and he said, خُذُوا عَنِّي مَنَاسِكَكُمْ, take from me your Hajj rites. There is a difference of opinion as to whether it is a condition that the sa'i should be after the tawaf. Some scholars say it is not a condition, you can do the sa'i even before the tawaf, but we have put it in the list anyway just for your information. Point number 6 is that 7 circuits need to be completed, because this is the sunnah, and Rasulullah ﷺ said, خُذُوا عَنِّي مَنَاسِكَكُمْ, take from me your Hajj rites. So doing 5 circuits or 6 circuits is not good enough. Point number 7 is al-isti'ab, which is to complete the whole distance between as-Safa and al-Marwa. You begin from the mountain of as-Safa. Inna as-Safa wal-Marwata min sha'airillah. The Safa and Marwa are from the emblems of Allah. So Rasulullah ﷺ said, Abda'u bima bada Allahu bihi, I begin with that which Allah began with. So you begin with the mount of as-Safa, and you need to reach the mount of al-Marwa. So you come onto the mount of al-Marwa, and there you make the dua. We will discuss that in a little while. So the point is that the whole distance needs to be covered from Safa to Marwa, and you need to reach both of these mountains. If you take any shortcuts unnecessarily and intentionally, then you need to repeat that particular circuit. Fundamental rule number 10. These are the arkan of the Umrah, the essential pillars of the Umrah. There are 3 of these, so this is to note and memorize. Number 1, the niyyah of ihram. Number 2, the tawaf. And number 3, the sa'i between as-Safa and al-Marwata. Let's go through this. Al-Umrah in the language means a ziyarah, which is a visit. In the technical terminology, it's to visit the house of Allah and to perform these specific rituals or rites. Number 1 of the essential pillars of Umrah, without which your Umrah can never be completed, is the niyyah of ihram. This is the intention to come into the sacred state where you make haram on yourself that which normally would be halal. The intention, as always, is in the heart, but as part of the ritual, when you begin to say the talbiyah, you begin by saying labbaik Allahumma umratan, and then you say the talbiyah, which is as we stated before. Point number 2 is that you make the tawaf. This is as Allah Azza wa Jal says, وَلْيَطَّوَّفُوا بِالْبَيْتِ الْعَتِيقِ, and let them make the circumambulation around the ancient house. Point number 3 is the sa'i between as-Safa and Marwa, just like the Hajj. In the Sahih, the Prophet ﷺ told his companions when they came to make Hajj, he told those companions who did not have an animal with them to sacrifice, he said, مَنْ لَمْ يَكُنْ مِنْكُمْ أَهْدَى فَلْيَطُفْ بِالْبَيْتِ وَبَيْنَ الصَّفَا وَالْمَرْوَةِ. Whoever has not brought an animal, a sacrifice along with him, then let him perform the tawaf around the house and between the Safa and Marwa. So he ordered them to make the Umrah instead, and then after the Umrah they can make themselves halal by releasing from the ihram, and then they can do the Hajj when the Hajj time comes in. Fundamental rule number 11. These are the wajibat of the Umrah, which if you do not do them, then you are sinful and you must sacrifice a sheep for the atonement. There are 2 wajibat. So number 1 is to enter the state of ihram from the miqat, and number 2 is to shave the head or at least shorten the hair. we'll go through this. This point number 1 is the same as we mentioned with the Hajj. The ihram must be done from the miqat. If you go past the miqat and thereafter you enter into the state of ihram, then your Hajj will be sahih, but you would have to sacrifice a sheep because of this shortcoming. If a person is living in Mecca, he is a resident of Mecca, then for him to perform the ihram, he would have to go to the Masjid at-Tan'im. The evidence for this is when Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha wanted to perform the Umrah, Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam told her brother Abdurrahman to take her to the Tan'im Masjid. From there she will enter into the state of ihram and come in and make the Umrah. So the miqat of the people of Mecca, when they want to make Umrah, not the Hajj, the Umrah, is to go to Masjid at-Tan'im and make the ihram from there. Point number 2 is that you have to shave the head or shorten the hair at least. It would make sense that if you are making Umrah, then you are going to perform the Hajj a short while after this, because you're making the Hajj at-Tamattu', which is the Umrah then the Hajj. It would make more sense therefore to shorten the hair, so that by the time you come to cutting the hair for the Hajj, you can have some hair on your head to cut. Shaving is generally better than cutting because of the hadith where Rasulullah prayed for the mercy of those who shave their head twice, and on the third time he prayed for the mercy on those who cut their hair short. So shaving is better than cutting it short. Again, the hadith on this is when Rasulullah ordered his companions who did not have a sacrificial animal to make the Umrah, and he told them to make the tawaf around the house and between the Safa and Marwa, and he told them ثُمَّ لْيُقَصِّرْ وَلْيُحْلِلْ, then shorten the hair and become halal, meaning exit from the ihram. After mentioning these fundamental rules, let us spend some time giving a brief description of the Hajj and Umrah. The Hajj which we'll describe is the Tamattu', where you make the Umrah and then the Hajj. This is most common for people traveling to Mecca. When you enter into the state of ihram, it is sunnah to take a bath, and of course you will then need to enter into your clothing of ihram, which is normally the rida and the izar, the upper clothing and the lower clothing, and they are white colors because this is recommended. The bathing and the clothing would need to be done before you board the plane which is going to take you to Jeddah airport. Some people say that it is sunnah to pray 2 rak'ah before you enter into the state of ihram, and this is not true because there is no authentic evidence for this. The Prophet ﷺ did not do this, but rather those 2 rak'ah were the rak'ah of dhuhr. During the plane flight, as you approach the miqat, the announcement should be made on the plane. So you say labbaik Allahumma umratan, because you are intending the umrah, and then you call out the talbiyah. So this is the time where you make your intention in your heart to enter the sacred state. At this point, all those things which we have mentioned in the list of the haram things, like wearing perfume and so on, all of these things have become haram on you. It is sunnah to perfume yourself before entering into the ihram, as the Prophet ﷺ did this. Note here that you enter into the ihram when you make the intention in your heart, not when you wear the rida and the izar. At the Jeddah airport, please be extremely patient. Don't forget that you are in a state of ihram and you are not allowed to argue or fight with anybody. Progress is likely to be extremely slow, so be patient and bear in mind that these are Arabs, so you would need to expect a fair deal of incompetence. Once you reach Mecca, you perform the Umrah. You don't have to do this immediately upon arrival, you can take a little rest, but when you perform the Umrah, you make the Tawaf and then the Sa'i, and then you go off and get your head shaved or cut short, which would be better if you are going to perform the Hajj afterwards. This sounds like a short job, but because of the extreme rush at this time of the year, it's likely to take you around 2 to 3 hours. After you shorten the hair, your Umrah is complete and you can dress into your normal clothing, and the things that were haram for you are now halal, and you just have to wait now until the 8th of Dhul Hijjah. When the 8th of Dhul Hijjah comes, you take a bath, you get into your ihram clothing, and you make your intention for the Hajj, and then you say Labbaik Allahumma Hajjan, and then you call out the Talbiyah. The Talbiyah is to be called out as much as you can. There's no specific time to call out the Talbiyah, it's just the more the merrier, but particularly when you're boarding the bus or a car to move around, then this is a more emphasized time to call out the Talbiyah. In the Umrah, you consistently call out the Talbiyah until you make the Tawaf. In the Hajj, you keep calling out the Talbiyah as much as you can until you throw the stones at the Jamrat al-Aqba on the 10th of Dhul Hijjah. So on the morning of the 8th, you make your way to Mina, where there are many tents. There you spend the whole day. You pray Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha and the Fajr for the next day. All prayers on their times but shortened. So the 4 rak'ah would be shortened to 2, but you don't join anything here. And you spend this day in the dhikr of Allah, circles of knowledge and performing useful deeds, and you keep away from any worldly activities. On the morning of the 9th of Dhul Hijjah, you make your way to Arafah. If you're traveling on a bus, you should increase in your talbiyah, because Rasulullah ﷺ would increase in his talbiyah when he was riding the animal. You reach Arafah in time for Dhuhr, where you will join the Dhuhr and the Asr together, both shortened. You spend the rest of the day up until Maghrib making dua and making dhikr and really striving in this day. It comes once a year and it is the best day in the whole calendar. At Maghrib time, you leave for Muzdalifah, and again be sure to increase in your talbiyah when you are traveling from place to place. And at Muzdalifah, you spend the night there resting, and you can sleep there. Upon arriving at Muzdalifah, you pray the Maghrib as 3 rak'ah and the Isha as 2 rak'ah, combining them with 1 adhan and 2 iqamas. Then you spend the time there up until Salat al-Fajr, where you pray Salat al-Fajr, and you stay there up until when it gets quite light but before sunrise. At that point you make your way to the Jamrat al-Aqba to stone that. And again, make sure to increase in your talbiyah when you are traveling, and your talbiyah stops at the Jamrat al-Aqba. You can collect the stones for the Jamrat al-Aqba anywhere really. The matter is wide in scope. The Prophet ﷺ collected them on his way to the Jamrah. You can collect them at Muzdalifah or before that, it doesn't really matter. Thereafter, you would need to sacrifice an animal. You can go to the bank and buy an animal to sacrifice, or you can go to the sacrifice place yourself and sacrifice the animal, although you would have to wait a few hours for your turn because there will be many people there. Next, you go and get your head shaved. After you have your head shaved, you are free from the ihram and able to do all things that were haram on you except sexual intercourse. Then you go and perform the tawaf al-ifadah and then the sa'i afterwards. Be sure to take notice of the conditions for the tawaf and the sa'i to be sahih, that you implement all the necessary parts as we mentioned. After you have done all this, you are free and released totally from the ihram and are able to do all things that were forbidden on you. You begin the tawaf around the house from the black stone. If you can touch it and kiss it, then this is good enough. Otherwise, you can just point to it with your right hand. You go all the way around, and there is no particular dua that you need to read. All those du'as that people may claim to be legislated du'as are wrong. It's just any du'a is permissible, except when you're on the last side of the Kaaba, you would read رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ. This is between the Yemeni corner and the black stone corner. You make 7 of these. As you go around the tawaf, do not indulge in idle talk, but rather occupy yourself with the dhikr of Allah, the Quranic recitation, dua, and all these kinds of goodness. As Rasulullah ﷺ said, إِنَّمَا جُعِلَ الطَّوَافُ بِالْبَيْتِ وَبِالصَّفَا وَالْمَرْوَةِ وَرَمْيُ الْجِمَارِ لِإِقَامَةِ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. That the tawaf around the house and the sa'i and the throwing of the stones has only been legislated to establish the dhikr of Allah. After finishing with the tawaf around the house, you pray 2 rak'ah nafil salah anywhere in the masjid. When it comes to making the sa'i between Safa and Marwa, first of all you come on to the mount of As-Safa and you say this dhikr whilst raising your hands. La ilaha illallahu wahdahu la sharika lahu, lahul mulku wa lahul hamdu wa huwa ala kulli shayin qadir. La ilaha illallahu wahdah anjaza wa'dah wa nasara abdah wa hazama al-ahzaba wahdah. After saying the dhikr, you make a supplication, any supplication, but make a good supplication. Then you say this dhikr again, and then you make the supplication again, and then you say this dhikr again, and you make the supplication again. So you're doing it 3 times, and then you get off Safa, you make your way to Marwa. Of course, you make the ramal between the 2 green posts, and when you come on to Al-Marwa, you do the same thing again. You make the dhikr and the supplication 3 times. And you do this every time you climb onto the mountains of As-Safa and Marwa. As you make your circuits between Safa and Marwa, occupy yourself with the dhikr of Allah and making dua. This dhikr, La ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu, lahul mulku wa lahul hamdu wa huwa ala kulli shayin qadir, is one of the best of the dhikrs, as Rasulullah ﷺ said, and it is also the dhikr which you need to make much mention of on the day of Arafah as well. So as well as making dua, you need to increase in this dhikr. The other place to make a lot of dhikr and dua is in Muzdalifah. So after you pray your Fajr and you're waiting for the sky to become light, you spend your time making much dhikr in Muzdalifah. So the 10th of Dhul Hijjah is a busy old day for the Hujjaj. It is often called the Hajj al-Akbar, the biggest Hajj, because there's much going on this day. After this comes the 11th, 12th and 13th of Dhul Hijjah, which are called the Ayyam al-Tashriq, and these days are to be spent in your tents in Mina, where you will pray each prayer on its time, and the 4 rak'ah prayer will be shortened. It is highly recommended that you do not leave after the 12th and that you stay on for the 13th. This is better for you. And then the 13th also is a lot quieter and a lot more peaceful because many people have left. After spending Ayyam al-Tashriq in Mina, and you'll remember that it is wajib to spend the nights in Mina, you are free to leave, but before you leave there's one more act that you must perform, and this is the Tawaf al-Wada', the farewell Tawaf. Everybody must perform this except a woman in her menses. She does not need to perform this. So after doing Tawaf al-Wada', you are free to leave. But if you were to perform Tawaf al-Wada' and then you stayed in Mecca for some shopping or some other unnecessary need, then you would need to perform Tawaf al-Wada' again, so that it becomes the last action you do before leaving Mecca. Something else worth noting is that on the 10th of Dhul Hijjah, as we mentioned, there are many actions that you must perform. These acts do not need to be done in any one particular order. The order that we have mentioned is the recommended order, but if you were to swap and switch the order around, then there would be no harm on you. So if you made the Tawaf al-Ifadah first, and then you shaved the head, and then you sacrificed the animal, and then after you pelted, it wouldn't matter. You can swap the order around and the issue is flexible. Note also that if you were to perform any of the forbidden acts during the ihram out of forgetfulness, so let's say you cut your nails or your hair intentionally, but you forgot that this was a prohibited act, then there would be no fidya on you. It's just when you do it intentionally and you know that this is a forbidden act and you haven't forgotten. But if you forgot, there's nothing on you. Let's take some revision questions to top off this book. Question number 1. What is the evidence that you need to cover the awrah during the tawaf? Question number 2. During the tawaf of the house, when are you allowed to cut off in the middle of the tawaf, and when are you not allowed to cut off? Question number 3. What is the evidence that the tawaf and the sa'i are from the arkan of the umrah? Question number 4. What is the dua that you are to recite at Yawm Arafah which is recommended?